Hold this side in. Might have been Police Fire Commission maybe meeting. I don't know. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start as soon as our distinguished clerk has a seat. Okay, do I have a motion to come back into regular open session? Moved by Alderwoman Schmidt. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Painter. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Bray.
Here.
Alderman Matthey.
Here.
Alderman Sage.
Yes.
Alderman Malaboy.
Here.
Alderman Burgess.
Yes.
Alderman Painter.
Here.
Alderman Schmidt.
Here.
Alderman Black.
Yes.
Alderman Hallman.
Yes.
Okay, we're back and we have a quorum. In fact, everybody's here. Now we move right along here to a presentation and discussion to create a Transportation Advisory Committee and draft ordinance. Again, this is discussion only. We have a presentation by City Manager David Hales and Alderwoman Amelia Buragas for about 5 minutes, and then about 25 minutes of council discussion on this. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Hales and Alderwoman Buragas.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor and City Council. Tonight, what we're bringing to you in this work session is a draft ordinance that deals with the establishment of a Transportation Advisory Commission, and that title could definitely change. But as it's indicated, both myself and staff recommend council give favorable consideration of this particular request. We do see a number of benefits and value in establishing such a committee. I think the time has come as we continue to work on things such as complete streets and the implementation plan for complete streets, which is still a work in progress where staff has really made just very limited progress to date. This and the future that is going to entail greater citizen participation and transparency over what that means on an implementation. How do we continue through street planning, design, try to incorporate multimodal use and activity on these streets? We see great value in having such a committee that could be a focal point of what up to now has been handled by a lot of staff, not necessarily in a most open public way. And even though there has been some recent attempts to incorporate more of a public process, as we've done with other committees, we see some very significant benefit in moving to a full committee similar to what some other cities have done. I do want to make just a couple of other comments. So I think as we continue to discuss not only this committee, but a task force later on, and even as we have many of these citizens committees, I think a couple of things that continue to come to my attention as good best practices. And I think first and foremost is that whenever a committee is considered to be established, it is so critical that you be very specific as to what your expectations, what your direction or charge is, and what do you really want this committee to do. If anything, I think hopefully at some point in the future we'll have a little more discussion. Is there ways we can even do a little better job sometimes with many of our existing committees? I know sometimes they would enjoy maybe a little bit more interaction with the council, even just an annual report sometimes. There would be a way for them to kind of give you feedback on what they have dealt with for that year. And is there anything that the council wants to give them in the way of policy guidance and direction and things of that nature? So, but once again, I think with this draft ordinance, one of the things I would recommend as you discuss it tonight is there anything that should be added to, modified, or so, because the more you can be specific, I think the better, so that as members are, if this is created and members appointed, What you want to make sure is the members of that committee have a good, solid understanding of what you're asking them to do. Secondly, I just wanted to point out that our timeline is such that we're bringing this to you in a work session as been our protocol, and then in 2 weeks we would bring it back for final council action on, say, a regular agenda item. We've worked with Alderman Burgess as she has done a great deal of research and analysis of what other cities have done and how they've created such committees, so we've incorporated that. And both myself and other staff members will be happy to give further input or answer any questions. But I think at this point in time, Mayor, it'd be helpful to turn to Alderman Burgess, who recommended that this commission be established.
Alderwoman Burgess.
Sure, thank you. And I just want to bring to your attention a couple of things because we, as a council, last discussed this in January and received some feedback. So, and then there's been a lot of back and forth as staff has tried to figure out what this might look like and to bring into, make sure that all the concerns or comments from council from January were taken into account. One area where we've received some clarification from staff is with regard to the personnel makeup of this particular commission, because we had discussed earlier whether this would be a hybrid commission, whether it would continue to be a staff commission, or whether it be more closely aligned with our other boards and commissions, which are all volunteer citizens. And staff felt it would be best, at least this is my understanding, it would be best to be consistent with the other commissions and to move toward a citizen-based commission that is supported by staff and where staff is making recommendations and providing guidance, but the actual advisory commission itself would be full of citizens and residents. And then it was just a matter of discussing numbers. We thought 7 was, good a number as any, because 5 would make it difficult to get quorum, things like that. So that was one of the main results from our conversation in January. Other than that, it's mostly been trying to make sure that the language in any proposed ordinance is very clear as to expectations. Obviously, we don't want lay people making technical engineering specification recommendations. That's really not the goal here. The goal here is to help us out and to bring it earlier into the process public comment on more of these policy issues. So if you're all, I'm sure staff is happy to answer any questions as well, but that's kind of where we are and the process to get to where we are today.
Okay. All right. Alderwoman Schmidt.
So Amelia, you brought up something that actually I do have a question about. I'm trying to figure out, maybe we can talk a little bit about the existing stack and the technical questions that they address and how they do that, because I think it relies on regulations and various manuals of process or protocol, and how that fits in with this. And so I guess I'm wondering, like, what happens when this commission gets a question that really whatever formula that STAC uses needs to be imposed on that. Then what does that conversation look like, and who are they advising? And
well, I think part of it will be a learning process for everyone, because it's really difficult until we get into that process, and we've talked about this with Mr. Hales and Mr. Karch. It's difficult to get into that process to really figure out how it will work. But my understanding is it would be completely outside of this commission or body to ever actually have, physically have the engineering specifications for a road and to make any comment on that. And it's just very much outside what they're doing. But when it comes to something policy related, such as, is this road appropriate for implementation of complete streets and what that might look like? Or if there were a change that would have an impact on the public, where there's, again, a policy level decision, that would be discussed there. So this would not be something where the commission could make recommendations that are contrary to state law, federal regulations, things like that. We're looking for that policy level area. And I know it's somewhat difficult, and we've struggled with how do we make that clear. And I think part of that will be the staff liaison, the traffic engineer, making sure that the way that these questions are posed and the way information is brought to the commission is appropriate for what that commission has been empowered to do.
so when any of us receive, as I'm sure we all do, requests from a resident maybe for traffic calming, I'll say that's a stack conversation, here's the form, etc. Is that something that funnels into this commission, or is this something that that our public works continues to work with, and how does
Sure, and I think that's probably
link?
a good example of how something that would go to this Board or Commission. Traffic calming measures could go there. However, because for the most part, that is a policy level decision. So, okay, do we want to use speed bumps somewhere? And that's a policy level decision. But within that, there would be some decisions like, for example, the size of the speed bump. This board would never be responsible for that. They're not going to make a 4-foot high bump, that kind of thing where they would be clearly outside the norms. But this policy level decision of, is that appropriate? I think, oh wow, we got lots of, yeah, probably would be part of this conversation.
So just to follow up on that, though, I think when STAC makes a decision about traffic calming, they apply a number of metrics to that. So
yeah, and I think that would be the yeah, but that would be the report to this body. That would be part of that report to this body, and that's pretty similar to what the Planning Commission does, or the Zoning Board of Appeals, where they're given a technical analysis that kind of underlays or is the foundation for the policy level decision. And I think we've always been very, very clear that this will always be an advisory commission. They will not do anything that council will not have final oversight over. So we will always be the final oversight body here to make sure that there's no issues.
Alderwoman Howman and Painter and Sage.
Thanks. And I appreciate the work that's been done so far. Do have a couple questions. Will community development be at the table with this, since we're going from infrastructure to kind of looking at streets as on more of a...
Yeah, in one of our earlier drafts, we specifically placed that in the ordinance, and I think it might be worth having that discussion whether we want to put it back in, because some of these policy level decisions really need an interdisciplinary viewpoint. I think community development, I also think the police department needs to be part of this. And at one point in time, we had a draft that actually had a review process laid out more explicitly, saying that these other departments will review any staff recommendation and have the ability to comment on that and provide their own commentary. And I think that could have a great deal of value when we're looking at transportation, which really goes outside beyond the bounds of any single department, even though it's very well grounded in public works. And I think as a result, the traffic engineer really should be our main liaison. But we had looked at that, and I think that was removed. Maybe David can talk about why it was removed. And
yeah, let me. I think I would recommend on the side of allow flexibility. So as an example, for the city manager to appoint any and all staff members that might be needed, because the group that maybe look at one issue, say like a speed limit on a street, is going to be different than maybe the width of a street, and adding a bike lane, or even several other matters on that. And rather than kind of tie yourself down to list each and every one of those people when they may not always be needed on the issue, we just said, why don't you leave it up to the city manager? Because up to now, it's, all the policy issues we bring to you, it's always my intent is that, who all needs to kind of give some input, or do you have input to give? And if you don't, there may not be any input, coming to them. But we don't want to necessarily limit what might be good, valuable input, but we also don't want to be overly burdensome, which I think is kind of the case with the makeup or what of STAC is. We even had people from the outside, which even in the meetings I've sat in, I kind of question what value and benefit are we getting on some of those, because it was such a localized issue. So, but as you say, community development plays a very critical role, especially as the gatekeepers of the comp plan and what we're trying to achieve there. And I think as you continue with one-stop shopping and things like that, so they'll continue to be, very much a part of the entire staff that could be called upon depending upon the matter at hand for the preparation of recommendations that'll go to this committee.
Yeah, I mean, I'd feel more comfortable if there was some mention that these departments could be used as resources going forward. So help me with what the specific goals of the commission are. I mean, if you were to say at the end of 6 months, has the commission been successful, how would we know that?
Sure. Well, and I think, what motivated me to be exploring this and to talk to the other council members about concerns was dissatisfaction with the current process and concerns from residents that they were not part of that process, that a decision was made behind closed doors that they could not participate in, and that's the way the city had done it for a long period of time. And then looking at how other departments handle it and have, moved past that with other boards and commissions. So I think my two main goals are transparency and involvement. And I think that we will easily be able to see if that is successful. And certainly there's a high probability it will because, number one, the meetings will be public. There will be agendas. There will be minutes. So if there's any question about what was decided, there's an easy answer. And there will be opportunity for public comment. And both of those pieces have been missing from these conversations for many, many years. And again, that was just the city's policy. That's, no one was hiding anything. It was just, there's nothing insidious here. It's just the way it was. But given our recent conversations that are very policy-based, I can see how this would be very helpful to us as a council as well to begin having these conversations.
I certainly don't question that it'll be helpful. I just, I would just feel more comfortable if there were specific goals that the commission was responsible for.
Yeah, and I think that there are some in here, help with implementation of complete streets. What does that look like? Provide advice, brainstorming, make recommendations to council about what actions can be taken. I certainly hope that this commission, I think we know that there are many people in the community who are interested in this area, and I hope that we end up having a very active commission that works closely with staff to collaborate and to provide us greater input in the process.
And the word advisory, we don't have that in most of our other commissions.
Yeah, I think for consistency of nomenclature, I would personally be more comfortable with Transportation Commission, just because it's not the Planning Advisory Commission, it's not the Historic Preservation Advisory Commission, and that's just just as a matter of nomenclature, because I think if we keep it in there, and it's just kind of an artifact of STAC, if we keep it in there, it could cause confusion that there was some intent there above and beyond what the ordinance states. Yeah.
And what if staff recommends one decision and the advisory commission favors a different one? What happens then?
It's like any other board and commission. Council, makes the decision, the final recommendation. Yeah. I mean, we've seen that with zoning. We've seen that probably not recently, but I'm sure we see it on planning, where there are disparate opinions, and council, as the elected officials, makes the final decision.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Alderwoman Painter and then Sage.
Well, thank you, Amelia. I'm very supportive of this. I signed off on this too, but my name's not there. Anyway, I had a question about how this would interface with STAC. Do people report to STAC first? Do we tell them to go through STAC, and if they don't get an answer back, then we tell them to go to the commission, or commission first? How does that work?
Jim, I think this is a question for you. Does STAC just go away, and that that staff is obviously still fulfilling that function here, but in a different manner? Is that what it would look like?
STAC would no longer, that's part of the resolution, was to dissolve the Staff Traffic Advisory Commission, in its current form. And so then it would, again, as the city manager would designate who would be before the Transportation Advisory Commission would revise the appropriate people. Even people like, parks, recreation, cultural arts, there might be Constitution Trails. And just so the council's aware, that's currently what's done now with STAC. It's, it starts off with a set group, but it can bring others in as well.
So STAC becomes TAC.
Basically.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Sage.
A couple questions, and I don't know, maybe Jim or David, because I'm going to reference back to our January 17th Committee of the Whole meeting. Jim or David, have we talked about opening up the STAC meetings. We talked about an incremental approach to change, to try to induce and encourage greater public comment. Have we done any of that with STAC?
Yeah, I guess it is important for the council to know we didn't ignore your conversation on January 17th. Since that time, any issue that came before the staff traffic, not transportation, traffic advisory committee, the citizens were invited to come in. They were told about the time. It was a public process. They had the ability. We considered it an education type process. So we did take that as that interim step from the city council between then and now.
Okay. Because I guess I need some help understanding, and I'm not sure who to direct this to, but I did go back and review the committee of the whole meeting from January 17th, and it starts at about an hour and 32 minutes, goes to around an hour and 48 minutes. I know I talked about an incremental approach. I won't put words in Mboka's mouth, but he mentioned that as well. Scott may have alluded to it, although in a different wording. And so I guess I'm having trouble understanding how we get from a sense of a council that we like to look at a more incremental, measured approach. And I think even Terry, if I recall, at an hour and 38 minutes, even the mayor said, yeah, maybe we open it up, to more incremental approaches. So I need some help understanding if staff went back and did what we asked them to do. I'm having trouble understanding how then we get to a full-blown new commission if we haven't even waited to see how some of those incremental changes have been played out. The effectiveness of those or feedback on those or evaluating those.
Jim sat down, so I think he wants to.
Well, no,
Which is fine. Let me give you my perspective. My memory, and I've reviewed that meeting as well, is that comments were made, and then the directive was given to staff to come to us with a proposal. And this is now staff coming to us with a proposal. And I think certainly one aspect would have been to do a hybrid commission, but again, it's my understanding staff thought it was best to be consistent with other boards and commissions. Certainly, I think if people were not comfortable with that, we could take a different approach, but I think that our other boards and commissions work very well, and so under the close oversight of the traffic engineer, I think we could get some very nice results out of this.
And see, I guess my recollection would differ a little bit from that in that the direction to staff was to come back with some recommendations on how to incrementally open up STAC to allow more public engagement, open meetings, posting of agendas, minutes, that type of thing. Not to necessarily come back with a full-blown, I mean, to me, it appears that upon reviewing, and again, I would encourage that starting at an hour and 32 minutes into that meeting to review the comments of the council, it appears to me that staff did what we asked them to do, and so that's why I'm still puzzled as to the rationale or all of a sudden the appearance of a brand new board and commission, but I may talk about that a little bit later. I have another question specifically about the material as presented. This is in section 301. I'm looking at point number 4. The first sentence there where it says, items shall be placed on the commission agenda by the chairperson of the commission, appropriate city staff, and then calls out some specific staff. Now, I know it's been a while since I served on the planning commission. This idea, I need some help understanding, do we have other boards and commissions? Because usually the process or the protocol that's been followed is we may have direction from the city council, the elected officials. We may have something that comes out of some prioritization document that would go to staff, and then from staff be channeled up and work through a respective board or commission. That's kind of how the flow of topics and material works with the boards and commissions. I'm not familiar. Do we have other boards and commissions where we have, and I'm specifically concerned about the issue of traffic management and public safety, where we would have a chairperson of a commission putting things on the agenda? I'm not familiar that we have other boards and commissions where that happens.
Cultural arts. Sorry, I'm not clicking. Go ahead.
The Cultural Arts Commission, the chairperson works with staff, but the chairperson has put stuff on the agenda that we've talked about in the meeting as well as staff items as well.
So outside of conversation with staff, the chairperson at the Cultural Arts District has the arbitrary authority to put something on the agenda without staff.
Well, I think they work together. But it can be brought forward by that person, yeah.
I guess I'm uncomfortable with that aspect of it, in terms of, I guess I would like to see more, again, of a streamlined flow from the council, if you will, or something that's coming out of an approved budget document, something else that has prioritization or pre-approval, if you will, from the council to staff, and then up to the public members of a board or a commission. I would be a little concerned about a commission, a chairperson having the ability to put things on the commission agenda that are related to issues around public safety. But again, I'm still puzzled, and we'll probably listen for some additional comments as to how we jump from incremental changes to public access, public opening around the stack to a brand new a commission. So thank you, Mayor.
Just on that, if the commission doesn't like what a chair is doing, they can remove them. I mean, if they weren't, as Jamie says, sort of working together. But I mean, as I understand it, this goes back to the early summer, right, Amelia, where you had a version of this proposal and was bringing it forward. There could have been an incremental approach. And it sounds like staff did a little bit of an incremental approach over the last couple months. Anyway, so any other comments? Sorry, Alderman Rambo.
I'm not opposed to this generally, but I remember David talking about earlier that the staff made some staff attempts, and I feel like I haven't heard fully from the staff about what the results of those were. Did it work? Did it not work? It's just to me, as a matter, I would feel better, if I've heard about, what's worked, what hasn't, and I don't think the memo covers that. Have we done it? What's happened?
Well, let me give you just some of my observations over 8 years, and if there's anything, I think the current or former STAC committee was one that over the years there's been a lot of criticism. Even if you get into some of the rules and regulations we've established, say for traffic calming device, many of these have been established by the engineers, and I think they've served us well, but oftentimes we get asked the question, well, I don't like that because it won't serve my needs. Can we change the rules and regulations? So rather than staff necessarily having the final say over some of those rules and regulations, I think it'll kind of insulate staff a little bit more if ultimately this committee reviews those, and the council can either approve them or delegate to the city manager the authority to approve those. But oftentimes you can raise the same issue with speed limits and many other issues traffic related, whether or not a crosswalk ought to be put in. And well, the engineers use this kind of standard, to decide that. Well, what if you want to change that standard? So I think this is going to be a natural evolution, I think, from what has, worked okay. But I think given the use of committees in many other areas in establishing policies and procedures that only the council can have final say on, or delegate that authority as they see fit, it'll kind of bring this area of municipal services up to on par and be consistent with other areas. Now, and in addition, I think it's going to also help staff continue to do our work, in a private manner behind closed doors, because there's sometimes when police and fire engineers, they'll sometimes have differences of opinion of how to address an issue. They can do that, but ultimately there's going to be a report that is going to go on to this committee. That's going to be a public document available for everyone to see, including the applicant, and then for the committee or commission to kind of hear all sides and then make a recommendation to the council. So I think it really does open up more of that process. But I think the council's also got to keep in mind, it does lengthen the process too.
Right.
So this is, sometimes it's not going to happen as quickly or maybe as you may want to see individually, because it is going to go through the committee just like the Planning Commission and many others. So, but I think it's a good evolution of where we've been. Staff is still going to play a critical role in giving those professional technical recommendations. And even sometimes there may be differences of opinion on a technical level, but those will come forward for the committee, the commission to consider.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up the notion of lengthening the process. As you know, we don't do anything very quickly. And that was also one of my concerns. I'm still unclear as to how this is going to work in relation to the day-to-day. So what I'm thinking about, for example, when we have a public safety issue like we had at the Lincoln and Bund Street, I think. So, where I think our ability to react very quickly is critical. I'm just kind of curious as to, and I think, to me, it's a lot easier for me to speak in terms of, a concrete example. So, how is that going to interact with the commission?
But let me go back to, I think, the first part. And I will say this, even as I've read this, I've had the same thought and question of, well, how is it going to work in this or that? There's no doubt. I think we start with the commission as it's identified, and then over this next year, we'll continue to learn. I think many things as we put it in practice. And both staff and the commission can always come back to the council and say, we would recommend these changes. As an example, I do think there's still some issues dealing with traffic that both the commission and the council may say, you know what, let's push that back on the administration. But I think they will define that so that it is very clear that's, not necessarily something that the commission and the council wants to always deal with on an ongoing basis. But we just need some practice in that. Let's try it. And then I think within that 6-12 months, come back with recommendations how to fine-tune it, because it is a work in progress. The same with the entire Complete Streets philosophy. Even this implementation plan, I think, is going to be a learning experience for all of us as we find our way in something that we, all really haven't had that kind of experience with.
Thank you, Mr. Hales. Actually, we have run out of time here, so...
No, I'm not done.
We have something. Well, you're going to have to be. I'm sorry.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Okay.
Because we too seriously.
We have another one. 4 minutes. We're going to have to start. Alderman Black and Schmidt, very expeditiously, please.
I'm always having to run against the clock. Yeah, thank you, Amelia, for putting this together. The way that I understood STAC from before is that it was if there was a project that came through it and staff denied it or did not recommend moving forward, that was the end of the process. That it would go to David and yeah. Okay. And I thought part of that disconnect that I was feeling from the public was that there was not a citizen's voice as part of that process to kind of hear that. And my fear was that if we had a group of folks that came in and said, okay, speed limit's 40, we want it to be 30, well, let's just settle on 35. I don't, that was making me uncomfortable moving forward. But what I'm seeing here is a kind of built in the framework that has been successful for other commissions. I'd be willing to give it a shot. I mean, my biggest thing that I saw in here that I just would bring up is that it's designed to handle complaints, which is on, it's on my PDF, page 19. Receive complaints having to do with transportation matters. I'd want to see it flesh out a little bit on what response is given to those complaints. Is it a written statement back? I mean, is it just kind of we reviewed it and that's it? That'd be my only piece at this point in time, and 7, I'm sure. But I think having that close relationship with staff is going to be key because these issues are technical in nature, and I'd be uncomfortable with having people trying to write policy when they may not have the technical expertise to do so. That said, this engagement is always a good thing, and Mavoka talks about this frequently, where the more public trust we build, the better, and getting people involved is a good thing. So, well done.
Okay. Alderman Schmidt?
A very quick question. Is there still a downtown traffic committee?
Yes, there is.
And is that being subsumed into this, or is that, why?
It handles it
different subjects. It mostly has to do with parking and issues specifically in the downtown, and they handle two different kinds of issues.
Can I just interject? I think that's probably going to be a work in progress. We do need to look at that, because if it's not rolled into this, then I think that could be problematic, but anyway, let us get back to you on that
I
point.
would appreciate that.
Okay. I think we had some questions, concerns, but it seems as if we can probably bring this up for a vote, and then if maybe possible amendments in the near future. Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye. We're adjourned, and we will meet, well, we're supposed to meet in 2 minutes. We'll say 3 minutes because I'm a softie. Okay.
You said there would be 7. Now, that doesn't include staff, right? Okay, but would they